is the Amadon Planet Podcast, episode 22. I'm your host, Joel Amadon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast is a special conversation. It's a great conversation between a bunch of educators. I really enjoyed it. You're going to hear the joy in my voice. You're also going to hear that we are not talking about the global pandemic that is influencing everything that's going on in the world right now, but is also specifically causing ripples throughout the world of education. So to hear a group of educators not talking about the influence of COVID-19 throughout everything is kind of was kind of weird when I was re-listening to it. But the reason why this episode was recorded, it was recorded in early March, and we haven't released it to now, is we were waiting for the release of a manuscript, an article, a journal article specifically. So myself, Dr. Ann Monroe, David Rock, the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Mississippi, and Candies Cook, the math coach at Oxford School District, who you've heard on this podcast before, we got together and put together a manuscript. You're going to hear all about it within the episode, but we recorded this before in March, and I was just waiting until the manuscript got released. And, since then, a lot has happened. So again, you're not going to hear a group of educators talking about the global pandemic, and that's going to be, maybe it's refreshing to you. I don't know. It was a joyful conversation. It's a great conversation that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. And this article that we share, it's about celebrating the struggle. Really about celebrating struggle within the math classroom, how struggle needs to be a welcome and valued practice within the math classroom, where when I consider my own experience in math classrooms, if you struggled, that was like you didn't know what was going on. You didn't belong. You weren't doing mathematics if you were struggling, when now actually that is mathematics. We do need to struggle, and that was always there. It just maybe was hidden from us, or hidden from me at least, in my own math experience. And so that was what the article is about. There's also some struggle dealing with how just the story of the manuscript, which we're going to get to within the episode. But also, we're currently going through struggle right now and thinking about how do we best educate our kids? How do we, how am I personally managing my own kids, my own work, and all the things going on with isolation and trying to shop for food. And that's not to mention all the different struggles that are going on outside of my household. And so, thinking about struggle, thinking about that we are going to come out better off and at the end of this thing. We are going to, even just thinking about my own field of education, think of all the things we're figuring out how to do with this situation that we're dealing with. And so anyway, there's something about celebrate the struggle. I hope you enjoy this episode. I enjoyed having the conversation with Candies and Dr. Monroe. And so my hope is that you hear this conversation between us and you kind of hear the joy, but then you also hear how the struggle of this, putting this journal article together, and the talking about struggle in the math classroom, that you see how Ann and Candice and I really are coming together as educators to figure something out with regards to how to put our ideas out there, but then how to really celebrate the struggle in the math classroom. And so I hope you enjoy. We're together again. The band is back together. So we got Ann Monroe and Candies Cook, and we have been talking about an article for a manuscript and an idea about struggle and shame for a long time. Ladies, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
All right. So we're going to, I think if we're going to do this well, I think we need to go back. So the whole reason for this podcast is, one, talking about, we have a manuscript coming out. It's Shame, Shame, Go Away, Fostering Productive Struggle with Mathematics. It's going to come out in the next month or so in the Record. Kappa Delta Pi Record, coming out pretty quick. And we've also been doing some presentations around this work. We did some at NCTM in Nashville. We did some local presentations. And so this has been around for a while. We've been talking about it for a while. We even have T-shirts. I'm wearing T-shirts printed up about this, about celebrating the struggle. But this manuscript that it first started off with was handed to me when I got here to Ole Miss in 2011. Right. But Ann, do you have some other background on this? So where did this thing come from?
Okay, so
I guess prior to 2011, and it could have been like 2 years prior to 2011. I honestly,
oh my goodness,
it was a while back.
Yeah.
So I had worked on some research specifically for my dissertation back in 2007 about shame and school-induced shame, and what college freshmen remembered from their school experience that induced shame, and looking at some things that happen in schools that induce shame in children, and those negative effects that shame had on them and their learning and their experience in school. And so through that research, I'd kind of looked at a lot of the things that created this feeling of shame or induced this feeling of shame in school-age children, and academic struggle was one of the categories that I found. And in particular, we had a lot of folks that talked about their struggles in mathematics, and then through my research in shame, I looked at a lot of the issues surrounding illiteracy and people's shame around their the fact that they can't read, and started kind of thinking and looking about how people have continued this feeling of shame around their inability to read, but once they reach a certain age, the inability to do mathematics becomes almost a badge of honor, and something that they felt like they're not really shamed about anymore. That they may have felt shame around their inability in mathematics, or with their perceived inability in mathematics as a young child, but then that faded as they got older. But if you can't read as you get older, that shame continues, and people tend to hide the fact that they can't read. And so this fascinated me with the study of shame, and particularly this juxtaposition between shame and reading ability and shame and math ability, and how the shame and math ability tends to fade over time, and that's not true with reading, and that people have this tendency to almost be proud of the fact that they're not a math person, that they're very willing to talk about how they're not a math person. I'm terrible at math, but nobody would ever say that about reading. And so I started talking with our dean in the School of Education, David Rock, who's a math math professor. Everybody's a math person, but particularly has written books about mathematics and things like that. And we were talking about this kind of phenomenon, I guess you would call it. And so the original idea that Dean Rock and I were writing about, we're going to write this piece, is just about this difference between reading, shame around reading and shame around math, and the differences.
I think you called it the shame paradox.
I did. I called it the shame paradox. Well, things have evolved. And so then I think we wrote something, actually wrote an actual manuscript and sent it off to the Record. Where it's now being published. And it was rejected, but they gave some really good feedback. They liked parts of it, and they gave some feedback. But as things kind of evolved and things got busy, I just didn't have time to really, work on it again and send it back out. And then Joel arrives as the new math kid on the block in the School of Ed. Fresh meat. I was like, hey,
straight from Wisconsin, farm fresh.
Take a look at this. And so when Joel gets hold of it, he sees it through his perspective, which is different. He has a different perspective about
that's a good way to put it.
What this means, different. What this means to him, what this paradox is all about, and then also just taking it in a different. And then I think Joel and I worked on it for a while, and it took it on a different life.
It did.
And I don't even remember.
It got rejected a few more times.
I think we sent it back out twice, and it got rejected. And then Candies came along in her doctoral program, and of course Joel and I know Candies as a teacher of our children in the school district.
Excellent teacher.
Excellent. One of the best.
One of the best.
And then of course Joel and Candies have been working closely together on her doctoral program, and he said, let's pull Candies in as a practitioner perspective. And that's when it really evolved into what it is now, about productive struggle and the avoidance of shame, and very specifically what the classroom can look like to make this sort of environment that's conducive to productive struggle without the negative impact of shame in the math classroom.
Yeah, and so that was the cool part about this podcast. So we've got these shirts. I think you even printed off our first presentation. You had like wristbands that had "Celebrate the Struggle" on them, and so we all had these shirts, and so we were talking about celebrating the struggle and making sure that productive struggle, is something that we want to celebrate in the class and not want to hide away. We want to say it's not something to be ashamed of. It's an actual valued practice in the classroom. And the thing is, we're talking about struggle with regards to math class, but then this article, this manuscript, was a struggle. And I remember when I was in my own doctoral program, Candies, you'll enjoy this, when I went and saw, I think the guy's name was Michael Olnick, something like that, at the University of Wisconsin. I remember he talked about the life of this manuscript, and he talked about it getting rejected and like finding different venues and doing all sorts of things. And I'm like, who would do that? That is just, that's like years of your life. Why would you do that? And like, but the thing is, you're not just sitting there by like the mailbox or by your email, like waiting on it. Like there's time that goes in between reviews. But it kind of reminded me. My dad called me in middle school. He called me gravel because I got dumped so often.
Oh,
but it kind of reminded me of all the rejection that was happening around this manuscript. All right, but Candice, you'll appreciate this. So like when I saw it, when it was the first time I got handed it across and maybe did a big rewrite of it, I thought about the idea of struggle, right? So like the idea of shame and the idea of struggle, and like the principles to actions was coming out, and we talked about, and then also Common Core. So we had in the Common Core, there was the standards for mathematical practice, number 1, which is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And that, and then what was it in the principles to actions? It's now I'm going to draw a blank. We need to foster productive struggle.
Right.
Yeah. Foster productive struggle. And so those two things put together seem like, okay, here's where I think the new stuff that's coming out in math education really speaks to this shame paradox.
Right. I agree. And actually just doing this within my classroom, doing the article, writing the article and then seeing the students struggle in my classroom and helping them through that struggle was very important to me, because oftentimes students don't want to answer because they have this whole shame thing behind it. But asking students the right questions, and talking them through the struggle is very important, which is the call to action part.
Right, exactly. And that was so even before I knew you as a student, and heard talk about you as a teacher, because we'd have some of my students in math methods would be placed with you, and like, ooh, we're doing some, like you wondering like, are things that I want to happen in classrooms actually happening? And then we talk about, oh, in Ms. Cook's classroom, they're happening, right? She is fostering some productive struggle.
Yeah, and even doing that, like it was hard for me at first, to learn the types of questions, the right questions to ask the students to get them to go ahead and answer, even though it may be wrong. But fostering that community within the classroom was very important. That's an important part of this as well.
Awesome. That's good. So, okay, so this podcast episode where we got a little bit of background taken care of, and I wanted to go through the categories and thinking about this experience of both even writing the article, you can take that area, or in the article itself, and which is, again, coming out very soon. I think it's in the April-June edition of the Kappa Delta Pi record. Yeah. As long as we don't mess it up here. So, but we just got the proofs yesterday, so it's kind of exciting. So, all right. So the high five. So, a couple things from each of us, maybe that we learned either writing the article or in the article itself. So, what are some things we learned from this experience? And even we could talk about presenting too, if that is something that comes up. All right. So, who wants to go first?
Okay, I don't mind going first. So a couple of things that I think were important from the article was actually allowing students to struggle is an important part of their learning. So not just giving students the answers when they are not getting it correct, actually allowing them to struggle and never saying what a kid can say. I don't know if y'all remember that article. Never say what a kid can say. So as far as like taking their pencil out of their hand and actually doing the work for them, don't do that. Allow them to struggle. And I keep going back to this whole questioning part because that is very important. So you ask the right questions so the students can begin to explain their thinking. That's important. Oh, and another thing, it's important to empower the students through the struggle as well. So meaning praise them when they are on the right path to that solution, and let them know that you're on the right path. We're not quite there yet, but you're on the right path to finding that solution. Yeah. That was one thing that I took from the article.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, and I know you're a runner too, Candies, but I'm training for a half marathon, and my son did it for the first time. The same half marathon, we do it in Springfield, Illinois, last spring, and thinking about this, like, there's a struggle. Like, you're going 13 miles, there's gonna be struggle now. Like, and seeing him, like, plodding away a little bit. What you could do, you can go pick him up in the car and take him to the finish line, but it's not as good as him doing every step of his gigantic feet all the way to the end, to the finish line, and knowing, like, okay, yeah, it might not be the time you want, it might not be anything, but you finished, you got there. There's some honor in that. And then thinking about, even too, they might not have the most elegant answer, but if they come up with something like, you did it, you did this, and you got there. And so now you can think about how to get better, but like the fact that they actually laid that path for themselves is excellent.
Yeah, I think for me, other than the perseverance, learning to not let go of a good idea, that good idea, it may change, but it's still the seed of the good idea, which is great. But and speaking to that, I think the big thing about learning is that the language around shame, for me, because that's what I like to look into, and that's what I'm interested in finding out about. The language of shame is different in different contexts. So when Joel came along and started looking at the article, the manuscript that I had written with Dean Rock, he saw it from a perspective of struggle. And so this idea of struggle, that word would have never come to me, because I'm not a math professor, so I'm not as familiar with like the NCTM principles and all that kind of stuff. And so, but then when he started bringing his vocabulary to it, and which brings a perspective, because when the language changes, the perspective changes, right. And the way that you say things, impacts the way that you think about things. And so I think that was interesting. And then when we started going out and presenting it, you start hearing what teachers are saying about it, and the language that they use around how they see this with their kids. And I think that opens up a whole new sort of interesting perspective that I would have never been able to take, even though I was writing about math. And I had someone who was a math person, in terms of their study of math, deep study of math. It was that other person's perspective that made it into what it is. So this idea about a doer. So like, I had never thought about the word doer before, but it's part of the math lexicon if you're,
doer of mathematics.
Doer of mathematics. Well, that fell right into line with when I study shame one thing about shame is that when someone sees themselves as they're supposed to be something and then they feel that they're not, it induces the feeling of shame. So if you feel like you're a doer, this idea of doer is really a different way of saying what you feel your identity is, and then your identity is very deeply tied to what can induce shame in you and what can't.
Right.
And so that's where this whole idea about doer, it speaks to this whole idea about how there's a difference with math and reading. So when everyone sees themselves as a reader or needs to be a reader. So if you see yourself as needing to read and then you see yourself deficient in that area, it produces shame because you're not what you're supposed to be. You feel like you're not what you're supposed to be. Does that make sense? Right. But doers of mathematics, this idea about doers, children see themselves as doers at a young age, and so they feel shame when they can't or when they perceive that they can't.
Right.
And then as they get older, they don't see themselves as a doer. They're like, well, other people do math. That's not my thing.
Right.
And so when you distance yourself from the identity of a mathematician, you don't feel as much shame. Therefore, you're free to talk about, I hate math, I'm not good at math, or I'm the worst at math, when nobody would ever say that about reading, would never pronounce that in public so loudly and proudly. So this idea of doer is such a parallel with what I'd been studying in shame about people seeing themselves, the identity, their self-concept, and those kinds of things. And so it's this language. What I learned, I think, is that when you reach out and bring other people in, they bring their vocabulary. And with that vocabulary comes different meanings, different experiences, and different expressions of the same concept. But it's not just the same, it's different. Because the vocabulary is different. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay.
That was a much more sophisticated way of
so very sophisticated.
Of my
this morning.
learning, which was like do good stuff together. I mean, I was just going to say, like, it's like same thing as what you're gonna say, but again, you said it much more eloquently. But like, it's better when there's more voices, like the more voices and different perspectives, and and having, it took 4 voices, right, to get this
That's right.
over the hump, and thinking about all that perspective that people are bringing to it, and just because we had basically the same manuscript, just without Candies, that got rejected again, and so like thinking about, okay, how can we add in another voice that's really going to put this over because we're missing something, right? We're missing something here. So
I like the way you brought in the whole doer of mathematics, though, because students, like you said, don't see themselves as doers of mathematics, even though you're using math every single day in every way. Time, when you go to the restaurant, you're doing tips, or you go to the grocery store and
route
you're
planning, through
like
the grocery store,
you're just unconsciously doing this, and students don't see themselves as doers of math unless they're working problems, and that is not what we're that was not what the focus is here, because we're all math people and we use math every single day in some kind of way, and students don't necessarily see themselves doing that. They just do it.
I was trying to think
that
of like
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to think of a metaphor, and it felt like, I had this, my dad said that he was good at math until he had calculus, and then everything shut down. So I had this like like this feeling like eventually I'm going to hit this like wall somewhere. And it like had some difficulties, but I'm just wondering, like, if other folks have the same sort of idea where they have this like interstate, that's their math career, interstate, they're flying at 55, and all of a sudden, like, it's like in Birmingham when the interstate ends, that one place where you had to get off before they continued it, and like it just ends, and all of a sudden it's like, all of a sudden you don't know how to drive anymore. It's like, no, you know how to drive. It's just different. It's just different kind of driving. It's slower going. It's a little bit, you got to make some turns and stuff. And it's like, how do we prepare students? How we show, if we don't allow students to struggle and allow them to have some gravel roads, in all the parts of their math career, like, there should be some interstate, there should be some gravel roads at the same time, in order to have them have some struggle, so they know when big struggle happens, like, no, you're secure. I am still a doer of mathematics. I still know what I'm doing. It's not like everything just disappeared.
Right. Okay.
Any other learnings?
Oh, one other thing that I did make note of is to say to students, in order to get them to explain more of what they're saying, is the whole phrase of, I don't know, what do you think? Saying that, even though I know how to do it, I just want the kids to tell me their thinking behind it. So I'm like, I don't know, what do you think? They're like, Miss Cook, I know you know, but, I really do, but I want to know what they know. So, having, again, that piece that I'm always going to say, I don't know, what do you think? And actually giving wait time is very important in the classroom.
Or even, too, like, I don't know, what do you think? And then you hear their thinking, and it's like, that is the, going back to the metaphor, like, I had this interstate here, and you went on this back road, but it is beautiful back there. There's a beautiful like you hear this thinking that's like, it might be like the most inefficient way to do it, but you're like, all the math that kid had to do to get there. And if I would have said, hey, do this, and taken away all that struggle, like taking, another metaphor, all the shell off the bird, then that's a weaker bird, versus like, wow, you just went and did all this stuff to get to the same point. That's cool. And to honor that and saying that's neat, and like even to share that with the class, like, hey, listen to this. This is interesting. Even though, we might have a more efficient way we're going to teach later, but these different, and then all of a sudden this other kid, well, I had another way, and like, it becomes like contagious.
Exactly.
Any other learnings? The other one I had was keep it as close to the kids as possible. I think one thing that we liked that we did with this manuscript was we put some vignettes of experiences from the classroom, which I really liked. I think that really brought some of the principles and the ideas to life, where we, and again, bringing in our own experiences with our own voices. I really like that. So.
Well, that just makes me think of making learning relevant to the students, and having those real world problems, so that they do see what is the point of this math. Right. So that just made me think of that.
And then teachers who are hopefully reading the article and like, oh, all right, what does this actually look like in practice? So,
Yeah.
all right. So now you know the next category. What is something you would have done differently if you knew what was in the article at a time before you wrote it?
Okay, I have one for this.
All right.
So, and this speaks to the doers that we were just talking about. So, thinking back on my time as a third grade math teacher, I taught third grade, so I taught everything. And my favorite thing to teach was mathematics. That was my favorite, and we had a great time doing it. But when I think back and looking at what we're trying to highlight in this article that we've just published, is this kind of authentic experiences, introducing students to authentic problems.
Right.
So you don't struggle. The whole idea is to struggle on something authentic, something that's a real problem.
Right.
Right. And so I wish I had gone back. So the question is, what's something you would have done differently if you knew back then what you know now, and I would have incorporated more authentic problems.
Right.
I think in my mathematics
versus
instruction.
Exercises. We talk about the difference
Lots
between
of
problems and
I did a
exercises.
lot of great exercises.
Yeah.
And we had, and I used to be so happy with my math teaching and so proud of it, and and we had a lot of fun in my room. But if I were to go back, wow, would it look different? There are things that I did that I would not even think about doing now, and there are things that I would do differently in terms of creating authentic opportunities to solve real tough problems, and not worrying so much about solutions, and not worrying so much about, are they getting it, do they have the answer I want them to have, instead of what you were saying, Candies, about what do you think? I needed to do more of that. So definitely for me, looking at the vignettes that we put in, Joel, that you were talking about, hearing Candies' experience in the classroom on a daily basis, and getting kind of back into that mindset and thinking about the classroom, really made me think of the missed opportunities that, in my third grade classroom. And so for me, that's kind of, if I were going to do something differently, that's definitely what it would be. It would be this idea of authentic problems. And then the kids become doers. They see themselves as doers because they're real. They're real world. Like you were saying, Candies, like they do all this stuff in real life, and they don't see themselves as a doer because we're not doing it in math class, right? We're not capturing those as problems. We're not letting them know, because they're not doing that in math class. They're doing these activities, or they're doing these drills, or whatever it is. And so I think my kids would have seen themselves as doers more if I had presented more authentic problems.
So, and just to add on to that, if you're looking for good problems, we actually have a post at AmadonPlanet.com.
Oh, it's on the website.
AmadonPlanet.com/good tasks. There's a
Oh,
bunch
good.
of sources. So
see.
we
I will
direct
take a look.
Ms. Monroe there back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day.
And so, and also too, just the difference between problems and exercises for those of you that might not know. So, exercises, you think about, you'd had to do the 25 problems, the odds were in the back of the book, sort of thing, where you had the algorithm, you had the directions, you just did plug and chug sort of stuff, and you did it over and over again. That's an exercise, like just doing 100 push-ups. You know how to do it. It might be hard, but you know how to do it. Versus, I've got to find an area of an irregular shape, right? There's no solution path that's set for you. You have to really think. You have to problem set. You have to think, how might I divide it up? What do I know? Do I know these different formulas I'd have to? Maybe I have to figure out some formula. So there's like a messiness to it, and I like to call them messy problems too. So anyway, I just wanted to add that on just in case people are thinking. So, Candies, what about you? You got something?
I do. So in my early days, I would have changed giving homework. So early on in my career, I would give homework because it's an exercise. This is what you're supposed to do. But the article talks about using homework as practice. For example, you practice your instrument. You practice how to play soccer. You go to football practice. You go to tennis practice. And I would have viewed homework much more as a practice versus this is just for a grade. So that was one takeaway from the article for me that I would do differently.
Yeah. And I know since I've been a professor, I've been exposed a lot more to group-worthy tasks and complex instruction, which is just a way to organize cooperative learning in a more equitable way. I wish I would have known about that work when I was in the classroom, because again, that was a way where there's many different ways to contribute to a group solving a messy problem like this, and then that allows kids multiple ways of entry into using the gifts that they have, but also multiple ways to struggle, like how do we struggle operating as a group, how do we struggle in figuring out this mathematics together, and then even just like how we learn, like it was better together to think and use our different vocabulary and whatnot, getting kids to do that in better ways. Now, I did use groups, but I think the structure of complex instruction, where it's Designing Group Work by Liz Cohen is one of the books, and then Smarter Together and Strength in Numbers are other books. We'll put links to these at the show notes at AmaZonPlanet.com for this episode. And anyway, those are all good stuff too. I think complex instruction really adds a lot to classrooms. If you haven't heard about it, I would go do it. And we talked about group-worthy tasks as well. All right, you make the call. Next category. What is something you will do or have done differently now that you know in the article or haven't written the article?
Okay, so this one's a little different. Hopefully it won't be too off on a tangent. But
we like tangents.
So this is just something I've been thinking of a lot lately, and this article is, part of that thinking. I've been looking at and studying nonviolent communication, and reading up on that and kind of discovering exactly what that is. And a lot of the things in nonviolent communication are things that I've been thinking about and talking about for a while. I just didn't know, it's just elements, like we said, language, people use different words than that. So thinking about part of nonviolent communication is this idea that we don't have control over people. We have our power over. We have power with, as a teacher in particular. And so this idea of productive struggle, and like you said, Candies, tell me what you think, or what do you think? It's this idea of letting the children have their own power and control over what they're doing in the classroom. And I think that our article speaks to this idea of giving up control, right? That giving up power, giving up control as a teacher, and letting the students have the power and the control. And what can we learn from our students, and what do we find out about their misconceptions and what the way they're thinking about things by giving them that power. And having authentic problems and having kids struggle and having giving them the power to struggle and not have to be right, and not looking for something that's particularly specific, looking just for what they're doing with it. That is a way to give students power, and have power with instead of power over, which is part of nonviolent communication. And I've been talking about this with my students in lots of other areas about classroom management and how we speak to children and how we, deal with behaviors, and even dealing with it in my own life with my own child about, letting him have control and choice and power instead of me having power over. What is it that you're going to do? What choices will you make? What happens when you make those choices? So to me, that's just something that I'm going to be continuing to think more about and talk more about with my college students that are going to be teachers, and talking about how do you have a classroom where you as a teacher have power with instead of power over. And I think we really need to look at this in general in our society and in our schools in particular in the United States. It's not like that everywhere. I feel like we have a very punitive system. I feel like we feel like we need control over children instead of power with. We want power over all the time. And I think that's an unhealthy way of looking at learning. I think it has negative impacts for children, and I think that's something that I'm going to continue to work on and read about and see where it leads me in terms of all different aspects of teaching, management, instruction, parenting. How do we let kids have more power, let them have the power they already have, but communicate that they do have it, and that we have a willingness to want to see it in schools. And so that's something this piece I think speaks to, is giving power back to the students.
I think that's an interesting concept that you have there, and oftentimes teachers are wanting to know, well, how can I increase student engagement? well, doing things that they are already interested in. And if you have an issue with giving them all the power, then at least give them some options. Here's option A, option B, option C, and they still have some choice in it. And that I really like that concept that you're talking about there. But to me, it increases student engagement by, giving them the power that is already there,
And then one thing about the power structure, this power dynamic, going back to this idea about shame, which is in the piece, when you take over, when students feel like that you have power over them, they shut down.
Yeah.
Because you're judging them at every turn. This is part of nonviolent communication. Is instead of judging people, you listen, right? You're listening and you're seeing why are they doing that behavior, or why are they thinking about the why instead of the it, right? And so this whole idea about giving them back the power speaks to shame. So if we give them back the power, there's going to be less shame because there's less judgment.
Yeah. Right.
When you have power over someone, it's a judgment position. When you have power with someone, it's an equal position. And so we're in this together. We're all in the same boat. That's one of the things about shame, is that when you don't feel that when you feel like you're in the same boat with everybody else, then you feel better about it.
Right.
And so giving the power back actually reduces the shame. And there's, complexities to that and all that. But that's just sort of speaks to this idea about shame that we have in the article as well.
Yeah, that just made me think about when you talk about nonviolent communication. Like, there's a talk that Danny Martin gave at an NCTM. I can't remember, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It was on like violence in the classroom, like academic violence, and they really showing children being removed from classrooms, but even thinking about like, are we being even violent towards their ideas and things by I mean, and like, why would you ever want to express something or put something out there, or even honor your struggle if it's like thrown back in your face? Like, how dare you do that? It's like, or it doesn't match my own thinking about how this should be done. Like, why are we on this gravel road? I got an interstate right here. Like, going back to metaphor. Yeah. But even having that sort of idea. Oh, so good. I like that. That wasn't too tangential. That was good.
I like that too.
All right, how about you, Candies? You got one?
So what is something I would do differently now that I know about this article? I think it was very important to know the trajectory. That was important to me. Knowing what my students should know before and after my grade level, like, that was something that, I don't know, this article just made me think about when it talked about the trajectory part. So knowing that, I don't know, in math, in 5th grade, they're going to be doing fractions, and then 6th grade, they're going to start dividing fractions. Just understanding what it is that my students should know before and after my particular grade level was something that was important for me that I took away.
Excellent. I went more with the writing side, because I think so I saw this article as something that was in purgatory. Like, it was like just this. It's like it's a written piece that has a home. We just haven't found it yet. And like, I've got a number of things that have a home, and that don't have a home, that they're in purgatory, and you get them out, because one of it, I think there is something about you're saying some things, but if there's ideas that need to be shared, you need to work at it to get them out there to be shared, right? And it's like when students finish their doctoral work here at the the University of Mississippi, I'm like, you got to get this out. Like, you found something. When you get the letters before and after your name and you become a steward of the profession, it is your responsibility. It is in being a steward to get these things out. You found something, you need to find a way to communicate it, whether it's presenting or writing. And I remember that when I thought about Rico Gutstein, he wrote the book Reading and Writing the World. It's basically on teaching math for social justice. I forgot the exact title, but anyway, it's something that really inspired me. And I remember asking him about it, like, so what's next? Like, what do you do with this? And he's like, I wrote the book. Like, the book is out there. People can play with the ideas, and now they can move it forward. And I'm like, that is the point, is to put things out there, and to put, like, your ideas about nonviolent communication, put those things out there so that other people can engage with them. And so that's something I just being a little bit more serious about sharing the work. So find more groups to write with. Right? So, all right, last one. Sum for 7. How would you sum this up this experience up for a 7-year-old. So my son Jackson, 7, gonna be 8 next week. So we might have to change the category. But wasn't we like some for 7? How about that? What do we got?
Okay, so for me, I went with a song. So have you all
Sweet.
ever seen
Yes.
it?
All right,
Yeah,
here we
have you
go.
ever seen the movie Zootopia?
Do you want us to hum?
Well, maybe. You know, by Shakira, Zootopia, the song called Try Everything. And in there she says, try everything, you know. And one little part she says, I want to try everything. I want to try even though I could fail. So that would be a 7-year-old, like the song of it to a 7-year-old, and I love music, so that would be the way to get it to a 7-year-old. Go and play that song, Shakira, Try Everything.
Try Everything, fantastic. That could be an AP song of the day coming up. There we go, good.
My sum for 7 is very similar to what you were just talking about, Joel, about if you have something to say, you need to get it out there. So what I would, in this experience with this article and how I would explain it to a 7-year-old is what you have to say is important and valuable, and don't be afraid to say it the way you want to say it, because even though it might be similar to the way other people are saying it, the way that you say it will never be like the way anyone else is saying it. Does that make sense? So you're going to add something of value because it's coming from you.
Right.
And so don't be afraid to, have your voice heard and persevere in having it heard. So if it's not heard the first time or published the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time, you need to keep at it. If it's important to you and you feel strongly about the message, the way that you're saying it is important. And you're probably saying it in a different way than anyone else is. It might be the same message, but because it's you saying it, it has a perspective that only you have. And so keep at it.
Y'all did a very good job. I mean, I was thinking about this, and I just think about you add time and you add effort and you extend that. And I've done a lot of things that's been over periods of time, like, either training for something or like dissertation, all this sort of thing, and this article being one of them. But like that time and effort, if you keep getting, and James Clear in his book Atomic Habits, he talked about this idea of if you get 1% better every day versus 1% worse, and he looked at the comparison of the two. It's like, it's phenomenal, like what the difference it can be. And so just thinking about this idea of let's just get better if we get better every single day, we're gonna be in a great place. And I even talked about that with my teachers, like getting better every day, and knowing that if I've got a teacher that's phenomenal, but they think they're phenomenal and they're happy with where they're at, versus a teacher that, is not that great, but they keep getting better. I mean, it's no contest. That teacher that keeps getting better, that keeps thinking about the practice and improving, I'm buying stock in them, because they're going to eventually pass that other person, and thinking about getting 1% better. Let's just get better every single day and keep at it. I think there's something in that perseverance that even a 7-year-old can understand. So excellent. So this is it. Thank you for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it. Any closing remarks, anything?
I just want to thank you, Joel, and you, Candies, for helping make this, helping get the message out. And, it turned into something I didn't expect it to turn into, and I think it's better for it. So just like you said, happy to get the message out.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome.
And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to even work with you all, and just empowering me as a teacher, as a practitioner in the classroom, and then even as a current math coach now. This empowers me to want to go do more and be better. So thank you for the opportunity, both of you.
That's great. That's what we want to use, the gifts we've been given to serve others. That's awesome. That's what we want to do here on the podcast and with this work. So thank you all. Wow. I love the conversation. I just love the conversation. I love and by what you can kind of hear from within our talk is we've talked about this a number of times. And even though we have talked about it a number of times, it was still refreshing to hearing what the different learnings and takeaways that were. And so thinking that just because you work with somebody for a while or you have some sort of exchanges on even on a certain topic, that there still could be things that come to light. And I think that's that's cool that we saw that in that conversation, or at least I saw it in that conversation. And then maybe that we're seeing that now in some of our interactions dealing with how do we best educate our students and given our current situation. So I enjoyed that conversation. Hopefully you did too. And thank you for taking the time to listen. We really appreciate it. So that is all I have for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. The show notes for this episode, which is full of a ton of links. There's a lot of things mentioned within the episode. So you can find those at amazonplanet.com/episode 22. Again, that's amazonplanet.com/episode 22. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, you can do a number of things. First would be to subscribe to the podcast. And second would be to rate and review it. We've got a few out there, but just if you took a moment to go rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you use, or even to follow on Spotify if you're doing that, whatever it is that you do, if you could do that, that would be great. Gets the podcast some attention and lets other people find it. So especially if you find that there's some useful information through the podcast, that would be a great way to show some support. Also, you could subscribe to something I've just started up. It's called the Amazon Planet Download. It's basically my email list. What I'm trying to do is provide a brief periodic email that contains some teaching resources and then just updates on what's going on Amazon Planet. You can also follow Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, or the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can follow that as well. All that is on the handle at Amazon Planet. You can also, interact with me on those platforms as well. I love that. I love especially hearing suggestions or questions or anything that have to do. I mean, I get emails too, but I love seeing the interaction on social media. It kind of gets a little bit of a following that way. Finally, if you're looking for ways to support the podcast financially and get your own Celebrate the Struggle shirt, which we mentioned within the podcast, you can go to the Amazon Planet store. There are links at amazonplanet.com. in the header and in the footer for the Amazon Planet store. You can also go to if any of the books that were mentioned, one, you could support your local bookstore. That would be great. But you could also go to the links, Amazon Planet Books. Again, there's links in the show notes for that. That will take you to Bookshop, and that raises funds for local bookstores. So if you're looking to do that as well, you could support the podcast and support your local bookstores. So anyway, thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thanks to Candies Cook and Dr. Ann Monroe for joining me on this episode of the podcast. And special thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And then finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.